Right, so we're ready to start measuring up our sights. The first technique that we're going to use is something called offset measurements. To do this, you'll need your rec sight, you'll need your baselines, you'll need your offset recording form, a pencil, and a tape measure. Now have a look at your tape measure. You'll see on one side there is a smaller measurement, which is centimeters. On the other side, there's a larger measurement, which is inches. Now, it doesn't really matter which one you use, but you need to be consistent across your sight. And our baselines are in centimeters, so we're going to use centimeters as well. So make sure when you're doing your measurements that you're looking at the side which has centimeters on it. Now, offsets are relatively simple. We need to know where a point is along an axis and how far away it is from that axis. So we'll decide on a point. Let's, in this case, use these two ends of the cannon. The first thing we want to do is take our tape measure, put the zero end on the point of the cannon or the other object that you want to measure, and then you want to see how far it is to the baseline. Now, the best way to find out how far it is to swing your tape measure along the baseline, and you will see when it gets to a right angle, it'll be the smallest measurement. Make sure that you always measure to the same side of the baseline. So the baseline in this case is quite thick. The tape measure is about 1 centimeter wide. So I'm going to take all of my measurements to the inside of the baseline. So I've got my 0 point of the baseline here, going up to 28, 29. So here's how I'm going to take my measurements. The first thing, 0 on the point that I want to measure. Let me find the right angle. Now I can see along the baseline that the first point is at 16 centimeters, and from the inside of the tape measure to the point of the cannon is 4.5 centimeters. Now you want to record that on your offset recording form, filling in the information at the top, and you will see there are several columns here. The first column, baseline 1 and 2, or the other way around, but make sure that you know which baseline is which. If we're calling this baseline 2, we will fill in baseline 2 in the baseline column. Then we think about what our points are. So this is our first point. We're going to call it point number 1. Put that in the point number column. Then we want to look at the distance along the baseline, which was 16 centimeters. So we fill that in. Distance on baseline, 16 centimeters, and then the offset, which is the distance from the baseline to the point that we're measuring. And in our case, it was 4.5 centimeters. Fill in the units in the place where it asks you to fill in the units so that you remember whether you're using centimeters or inches, because that will be important later. The next column, headed LR, is for left and right of the baseline. Now, if your baseline was going through the middle of your rec sight, you may have some objects on the right-hand side and some objects on the left-hand side. So you'd need to record that so you know where they are and how you plot those on your sight. But for us, all of our measurements are going to be on the right-hand side. The right-hand side, you always look from the 0 to the higher numbers. And if you're looking up the tape measure, that's the right. The other side will be the left. So everything that we're doing is on the right-hand side. You will see on the second baseline, everything will be on the left-hand side, depending on how you put your baseline down. You may not want to use this configuration. You may want to put it on one of the other corners. So we're going to fill in that it is on the right-hand side. The next column, details or comments. Because we're not numbering these sites, and we would number them if we were working underwater to keep track of them, we need to say what this is. So this is the back of the cannon. So we're going to say back of cannon. We're going to write that in our description, in our details and comments, and we would have to number these cannons, because there are more than one on the site. We would have done this on our site sketch, and let's say that we numbered this one 1, 2, and 3. So we would say back of cannon 2. The next measurement we would take would be to the front of the cannon, obviously. So we put our 0 on the front of the cannon. we find our right angle on the baseline. In this case, this end of the cannon is 20 centimeters along the baseline. So we write down 20 centimeters, and it is 5 centimeters offset. So we write down 5 centimeters. It's on the right hand side, and it is the front of cannon 2. It's point number 2, and it's on baseline 2. So we've recorded the two ends of the cannon. We'll do the same for the rest of the objects on the site. Bear in mind that you don't need to measure every single point. When you look at detailed drawings later on, we just need to find a way of positioning an object on the site, orienting it on the site, and making sure that we know roughly the dimensions. So for this rudder, we wouldn't have to measure all 4 corners, the bands on each 4 corners of the bands. We would just measure perhaps 3 or 4 of the corners using offsets or trilateration, which we'll look at later. But all we need is those points, perhaps 4. When we start to draw a site map, we will join up those points. And when we start to do detailed drawings, we will measure on the object itself to find out where the other details are on that artifact. So think about that when you're measuring up more complex things like this piece of the shipwreck, the anchor, and if you wanted to measure the rocks, you would do the same thing. But what we're interested in is the shipwreck objects themselves. The most complicated thing is going to be this. So think about where you would want to measure, how you would be able to position this and its outline on a piece of paper, and then you could fill in the interior details later on when you're doing your detailed drawings. So we would carry on with offsets for as many of the objects as we can, but offsets are not always possible. Sometimes there may be objects in the way. For example, if we're trying to measure this cannon over here, from this baseline, we can't get a right angle off the baseline to the cannon because the wreck and the rocks and the rudder are in the way. So we'd need to think of a different survey methodology in order to get those objects plotted in. And that will be trilateration, which we will look at in the next video.